A darkness, absolute and suffocating. It's like a thick, heavy blanket pressing in from all sides, stealing the very air from her lungs. The silence is so profound it's almost a sound, a low hum vibrating through the wood just inches from her face. There's no light, no sound, no sense of up or down. She tries to move, to stretch a limb, but her world is a box, a tight, unforgiving prison that smells of cheap lacquer and, well, something else. Something final. Panic, cold and sharp, starts to prickle at the edges of her awareness, a desperate scream building in her throat, a scream that has nowhere to go. She pushes against the lid, her palms flat against the wood, her muscles screaming in protest. It's no use. The weight is immense, immovable. Her name was Nacy Perez. Just a teenager, really, 16 years old. She lived in a small, close-knit community in La Entrada, Honduras, a place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at its own unhurried pace. Nacy had recently married, a young bride with a future that seemed to stretch out before her like a sunlit road. She was pregnant, her belly just beginning to swell with the promise of new life. One night, Nacy was outside her home when she heard a burst of what sounded like gunfire nearby. The shock, the sudden violent noise, seemed to trigger something inside her. She collapsed, her body convulsing, white foam reportedly frothing at her mouth. Her family, frantic and desperate, rushed her to the nearest clinic. The doctors there took one look at her. She was unresponsive. No heartbeat could be detected. After a few hours of observation, with no signs of life, they delivered the devastating news. Nacy Perez, at just 16 years of age, was dead. In the sweltering Honduran heat, traditions surrounding death move quickly. The funeral was arranged for the very next day. A simple wooden coffin was built, and Nacy was laid inside, looking like a sleeping bride in her white dress. So the procession made its way to the local cemetery. Pallbearers, including her grieving husband Rudy, carried the coffin on their shoulders under the unforgiving sun. They placed the coffin into a freshly dug grave, a stark rectangular hole in the earth. The family then did what was customary. They sealed the grave, entombing the coffin within a concrete and brick mausoleum, a permanent resting place for their beloved Nacy. As the family walked away, leaving Nacy to the silence of her tomb, they believed their duty was done. Little did they know their daughter's story was not over. In fact, the most terrifying part was just about to begin. The day after the funeral, Nacy's husband, Rudy Gonzalez, felt an unbearable pull toward the cemetery. Grief is a strange and powerful force, and it compelled him to return to the place where he had said his final goodbye. He went to her tomb, a concrete block in a sea of similar structures, and placed his hand on the cold stone. As he stood there, lost in his sorrow, he thought he heard something, a faint noise, a muffled sound, almost like a soft knock, coming from inside the tomb. But then he heard it again, more distinct this time, a scratching, a desperate, frantic sound, and then a scream. Rudy began shouting, calling for help, his voice cracking with panic and a wild, surging hope. Other family members who were nearby came running, drawn by his frantic cries. The family, armed with a sledgehammer they had fetched in a panic, began a desperate assault on the concrete tomb. They swung the heavy tool with all their might, chips of stone and dust flying with each frantic blow. With a final, desperate heave, the sledgehammer broke through the concrete wall of the tomb. Hands, raw and bleeding, tore away at the rubble, frantically clearing a path to the wooden coffin below. They reached the coffin and, using crowbars in their bare hands, pried at the lid. The wood groaned and splintered, and finally, with a wrenching crack, the top came loose. And there she was, Nacy. She was unconscious, her body limp, but there were signs that told a horrifying story of her ordeal. The glass viewing window on the coffin lid was smashed from the inside. Her fingertips were bruised and scraped raw, the knuckles on her hands bloodied from pounding against the unyielding wood. They loaded her into the back of a pickup truck and sped toward the same hospital that had declared her dead just 2 days earlier. They carried her into the emergency room, shouting that she was alive, pleading with the doctors to save her. The doctors worked feverishly, trying to revive her, but the ordeal had been too much. Despite all their efforts, they could find no signs of life. This time, tragically, the diagnosis was final. Nacy Perez had been given a second chance, only to have it cruelly snatched away. She was declared dead again. The second death of Nacy Perez sent a shockwave of anger and confusion through her family and the community of La Entrada. The family was adamant that the doctors were to blame. If they hadn't pronounced her dead prematurely, If they had conducted more thorough tests, she would never have been buried alive. They pointed to the evidence, the broken glass on the coffin, the scrapes on her hands. The doctors, however, offered a different perspective, one that attempted to explain the unexplainable. They stood by their initial diagnosis, suggesting that the sounds Rudy heard might have been imagined, the product of grief-induced auditory hallucinations. As for the smashed glass and scraped knuckles, they proposed a grim alternative, rigor mortis. They theorized that as the body went into post-mortem spasms, her limbs could have contracted involuntarily, causing her to strike the inside of the coffin. The legal and social fallout was immediate. Accusations flew, and the story became a local sensation, then a national one, a chilling cautionary tale broadcast across the news. The case highlighted the potential for error in even the most certain of diagnoses, especially in under-resourced medical environments. Even with the medical explanations and the tragic finality of Nacy's second funeral, questions lingered in the humid air of La Entrada. Whispers and theories began to circulate, moving beyond medical error into the realm of the supernatural and the unexplained. Some went back to the very beginning of the ordeal, the parents' belief that Nacy had been possessed by an evil spirit. Could there have been a darker force at play? Then there was the mystery of her temporary revival. How could she have awoken with such force after being declared clinically dead? The doctor's explanation of cataplexy seemed plausible, but to many it felt insufficient to explain the sheer terror and strength she must have summoned. The timeline itself presented a puzzle. Rudy Gonzalez claimed he heard her screams the day after the burial. How long had she been awake in that coffin? These unanswered questions ensured that Nacy's story would not be forgotten, embedding it into the very fabric of the town's identity as a chilling reminder of a mystery that was never truly solved. The impact of Nacy Perez's story rippled far beyond her immediate family, leaving an indelible mark on the entire community of La Entrada. Cemeteries, once quiet places of somber remembrance, were now viewed with a new sense of unease. People would walk through the rows of graves and wonder. They would pause, listen, and perhaps think of Nacy, forever changing their relationship with the finality of death. For the Perez family, life would never be the same. They were left to grapple with a complex and layered grief. There was the sorrow of losing a daughter, a wife, and an unborn grandchild. But layered on top of that was the immense guilt and horror of her ordeal. The medical community, both locally and beyond, was also forced to confront some uncomfortable truths. The case became a stark example of the dangers of premature death declarations, prompting discussions about protocols and the need for more rigorous testing. In the end, the town of La Entrada was altered. It became the town where the dead girl woke up. The story became a part of its identity, a piece of its history passed down from one person to another. So what do we take away from the chilling, tragic story of Nacy Perez? It's a tale that forces us to confront one of our most primal fears, being buried alive. This isn't just a plot from a gothic horror novel. It's a real, documented terror that, however rare, has happened. Nacy's ordeal serves as a stark lesson in the importance of caution and certainty in the face of death. It reminds us that the line between life and a state mimicking death can sometimes be terrifyingly thin. The story also highlights the profound cultural and social elements that surround death. It shows how our traditions and our scientific understanding can sometimes clash, creating gaps where errors can occur. The lesson here is not to abandon tradition, but to ensure that our modern medical safeguards are robust enough to prevent such a catastrophic failure. These are not just characters in a story. They are real people whose lives were irrevocably shattered, first by a supposed death, and then, far more cruelly, by a real one that should never have happened the way it did. Because as Nacy's family learned on that terrible day, sometimes the silence of the grave isn't silent at all. Sometimes, if you listen carefully enough, you can hear a scream.